Real Agriculture presents the Bushels and Bytes podcast, brought to you by the Canadian Agri-Food Automation and Intelligence Network. It's time for another episode of the Bushels and Bytes podcast, brought to you by Kane. And today we're going to dive into technology and looking at the livestock sector. Joining us is Dr. Kelvin Booker. He is with TELUS Agriculture and Consumer Goods. How are we doing today, Kelvin?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Thanks, Shaun.
I appreciate you joining us. So, Kelvin, I guess introduce yourself. Give us some of your background before we dive into this very important topic.
Sure. So, Shaun, I'm a farm kid from Saskatchewan originally. Grew up just south of Saskatoon, and I was going to be a grain farmer when I grew up. And my mother suggested fairly strongly that maybe I should go to university for at least a year, and I did. And I ended up going to veterinary school, graduated from the Western College of Veterinary Medicine. And when I graduated, I was interested in dairy cows. I don't know why. Hadn't grown up on a dairy, never worked on a dairy, but it was kind of the most interesting thing back then when I graduated, which would have been 1989. And I went to Cornell University and interned in the ambulatory clinic there and learned tons and tons more about dairy cattle. But what I really learned was that the herd as a production unit was really what I was passionate about, as opposed to just the individual sick animals or things in each of the dairy herds. But I also realized that I didn't learn those skills going through veterinary school at that time because we didn't really teach those. And so I went right back to grad school. I went back to the Western College of Veterinary Medicine in Saskatoon, got a master's degree there in epidemiology, and was fortunate enough that my supervisor at the time, Dr. Eugene Jansen, which I'm sure you know, he actually hooked me up with Key Jim. And I got to spend tons and tons of time with Key from 1990 on. And when I finished my master's, I went to Feedlot Health Management Services at the time. And never really looked back. Only real job I ever had in my life. And then Feedlot Health Management Services was acquired by TELUS Agriculture in November of 2020. And so our legacy Feedlot Health team became part of the TELUS Agriculture team. And haven't really looked back. It's been a little over 5 years, and all good so far.
Yeah,
I have the privilege of leading our animal agriculture team there at TELUS Agriculture.
Yeah, and that talk about that business and what TELUS is doing when it comes to animal on the animal side.
Yeah, so I mean, TELUS Agriculture Consumer Goods. I mean, as TELUS diversified their business side of things and got into the agriculture space, kind of have three different verticals in that, if you will, business units. One's on the consumer goods side, which is dealing with packaged goods, consumer packaged goods, and connecting that through the whole retail chain. There's the ag business side, which deals with farm inputs and those types of things, especially on the cropping side, growing vegetables, all that side. Some of it's compliance, some of it's the retail farmer agronomist interface and stuff, and they have a lot of software tools that facilitate that. On the animal agriculture side, we are a little bit different because as opposed to software as a service, we're actually a consulting company supported by software and really cool data type tools that allow us to help provide our customers, our feedlot and calf grower customers, and more recently our dairy customers, with information that they need to make better decisions about their operations on a daily basis.
You said the herd is a production unit. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think when most people, at least historically, thought about veterinarians, they called a veterinarian when they had a sick animal, or they had a calving cow, or they had something that needed a trained veterinary professional to come in and make some intervention and fix something. The herd as a production unit is more looking at the herd overall and trying to identify what are the things that we could change to maybe prevent disease, or what are the things that we could do to make the herd more productive, whether that was a beef cow herd and we're trying to get more cows pregnant and have more calves live and have greater weaning weights when they wean the calves in the fall, or maybe in the dairy side, whether that would be how do we again, get more cows pregnant, but have less issues in and around calving, and as they transition into the milking herd. And again, how do we help them produce more milk, or more milk with the types of components in it that bring value in the industry?
And has our movement or our improvement when it comes to ag tech however we want to view that through whatever lens. I would assume we've had massive advancements that allowed us to monitor and view that production unit. It's much easier today than it was, say, 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, for sure it is. When you think about the herd as a production unit, well, go back. When you think about the individual animal, when a veterinarian goes to look at an individual animal, they start with a physical exam, no different than when you go to your doctor, and they do a general exam and the examination of a patient to sort of understand what's going on. When we think about the herd, it's the data and the data collection systems and the information about the herd is what sort of is analogous to the physical exam. And so those data collection systems and then the ability to get the data out of those systems so that you can analyze it and look at it, that's the real key to, looking at the herd as a production unit. If we look historically, I mean, everything was written down, right? And so then you'd have to go through written records and make a bunch of notes of somewhere, which you can do. That's just not very efficient, takes time, those kinds of things. As we had computerization come along, there were some computer programs that were written to help farmers, producers record some stuff on computer. But it was probably only the larger operations that actually did that regularly, because otherwise you took the written notes, entered it into a computer program, and then did it. But I think more and more we've been able to enter that data directly at the time because people are used to, using their smartphone. And if we
Yeah.
can have it so that they can record it there as opposed to writing it down, we can do that. And then the second thing is then thinking about how do we take that information and summarize it and put it into something useful that's going to let ourselves or producers actually have something that lets them make better decisions about their operation.
And because of that, that being the outcome, it has to have identified some, I don't know, blind spots or old wives' tales that we lived
Yeah.
by, right? Like that has. What are some examples of that?
Well, probably the best one that goes back to when we first actually put computers chute side in feedlots. And it was the mid 1980s when Key Jim had the vision and others to, writing stuff down on recipe cards and keeping records was important, but that really, any kind of large scale operation, you couldn't analyze that. He said, we're going to have to put this chute side and we're going to have to teach feedlot cowboys how to run the computer 1985. So you can imagine that most people didn't have computers anywhere in
Yeah.
1985. But what that simple thing allowed us to do was to figure out how many days individual animals had been in the feedlot when they got sick. The old wives' tale, if you will, that we learned when we went to veterinary school was that you bought a bunch of auction market calves, you put them in a feedlot pen, and it took 2 or 3 weeks for this disease to develop, shipping fever or pneumonia. And at 2 or 3 weeks on feed, that's when the peak of the epidemic was. And so, with that thought process, there were lots of thoughts that, well, we could vaccinate the calves on arrival. We might, there's lots of different things we might be able to do to prevent this epidemic from occurring. When we actually charted it, once we had the individual animal knew what day it got to the feedlot and knew what day it got sick, turns out the peak day of getting sick was day one, and day two. So probably not too surprising that if they were already that sick when they got there, trying to vaccinate them and prevent disease, which takes 2 or 3 weeks to prime the immune system and get things going, probably isn't that surprising that didn't work very well. And that was where the thought process, when we looked at those curves, said, well, we need to do something the moment they get in the feedlot if we're going to do anything there. And ideally, we need to do something back at the cow-calf operation before they get there. Changed our thinking fundamentally because we had real data to describe what was happening.
We've seen like different ebbs and flows in terms of like procurement of feeder cattle to the feed yard. And I think there's the one ranch, one background, and then we had like pre-sorts were really popular for a period of time. Everyone kind of backed away from that. Did the having the data really, I think it has influenced how and where we purchase our cattle from to put in the yard.
Yeah, it does definitely. We did a really large scale data analysis project, and it's 20, 25 years old now because we had the opportunity to do it. It was one of the good things that came out of BSE being diagnosed in Canada. But when we were trying to understand, how many herds of origin end up in a pen of feedlot cattle, and not in one pen that you purposely pick and look at, but let's just do it across a large scale. And as an industry, no one really knew the answer to that. So post 2003, when the borders closed because we've had BSE and we're trying to understand what happens, we had a couple of feedlots that had recorded the CCIA tag numbers on every animal that had come in, and we worked out a proposal with the CFIA that said, "Hey, we're going to send you all these tags. Just tell us which ones came from the same herd of origin. We don't know. We don't care who the herds are or anything. You can code them one to however many. We just want to know which calves, came from the same herd of origin because of the CCI tag." So they sent us that. So one of these feedlots had bought 22,000 auction market calves. There were 4,000 herds of origin, 4,500 herds of origin in those 22,000 calves, which meant we had on average, 4 or 5 calves from every herd. And when we analyzed that, as soon as we had more than 6 herds of origin per 100 calves in a pen, that's when the risk for respiratory disease, and more importantly, respiratory disease mortality, went up substantially. So that changed. I mean, we knew that was the case. We just didn't know how bad it was because others had sort of described that. But that really fundamentally changed our thought process on two things. One, if we're buying auction market calves, we probably have to think about the fact we got a lot of herds of origin in there. But part two, even if we were buying single source, directly from the ranch, and we were going to put those calves together into pens, the average herd sizing Canada, let's say it's 50 cows. It's bigger than that in Alberta, but let's cross the country, it's probably about 50 cows. And we got half are male and half are female, right? So now instead of you got 25 cows, well, if you're going to fill a pen of 300 and you bought everybody's, you got 12 herds of origin, they probably start to act at some point more like auction market calves than they do ranch direct calves when we mix them together with from other herds. So those kinds of things were things that have allowed to make us progress over time.
Yeah, the power of data
Power of
analysis.
data. Yeah.
Like
Yep.
it's amazing.
Yep.
So as we've moved from like reactive medicine, treating a sick animal like you described, to more of that predictive management where we're able to simulate a health outcome before even an animal shows the signs. How is that evolving and changing the way that we tackle some of these health issues in a herd?
Yeah, really good question. Really good question, Sean. So the idea is super appealing, and we not just us, I think many in the industry have had the idea for 20 plus years because we realized the limitations of our physical pen checking side of things when animal health worker goes into a pen on foot or on horseback, spends, 5 to 10 minutes in a pen looking at 300 animals, and we expect them to pick out every one that is thinking about getting sick and those that are, et cetera.
Yeah.
So we've thought about these, whether they're wearables or whatever tool they are that would help us with that. The challenge is it's actually not easy. Cattle are they're a prey species, so they're used to trying to hide when they're sick, so that they didn't become lunch for some predator that was out there. So they're very good at hiding their signs of being sick. So it's not as easy as anyone would think to have one technology or one thing that's able to monitor one particular behavioral aspect at scale. And of course, trying to do that 20 or 25 years ago, then we had to deal with the limitations of technology at the time. All of that is starting to catch up. Technology gets better every day. It gets less expensive every day. We have great abilities for communication, and I mean communication between wearables and whatever receiver was going to get that information, and great abilities for processing capabilities and battery power. So it's all sort of coming together. It's not simple, because if it was simple, somebody would have already done it. And today, we folks in the feedlot sector where we are, nobody's got it right yet. But I think we're on the cusp of all of those things coming together at the right period of time, where I think we're going to see some technologies that check all the boxes in terms of how it would need to work, and probably measure more than one or two things. And when you put those things in combination, now it becomes a tool that I think is really gonna help us. Is that going to happen in the next year? Probably not. But within the next 3 or 4 years, I think we're going to see something. We're probably going to see a couple of them because I think there's several companies that are working on it.
Yeah, I get some of these press releases and a lot of big promises. So I'm
Mm.
glad, yeah, I'm glad to hear you kind of grounding us, and some of those data
Yep.
points that I hear about as I'm going to different conferences and events is like measuring like movement, or it's not just like the temperature stuff and things like that. It's time spent at the bunk or at the water, or those are the kind of things that we're looking at and adding that all together to get an idea. How is that animal actually doing? What's their happiness factor? Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good way to characterize it, Sean. There's more than one thing, and of course, the other factor is we have to account for things that are happening to the entire pen at the same time. So someone says, "Well, the animal moved less today." Okay, that's great, but so did every animal in the pen because it was a snowstorm and everybody huddled up in a herd.
Yeah.
So you've got to sort of have a reference there to correct for some of those things that are happening at the group level.
That's the hard part
And
about this, right? Is because there's just
yeah,
it's these variables, and in more of a controlled environment like a feed yard or undercover like in a dairy is easier, or I guess less
yeah,
external variables than say if we're looking at a cornfield on the cropping
yeah,
side, but it's still not a total controlled environment like a greenhouse, and so the science of this
for
is really difficult.
Yeah, and the dairy is where are making the breakthrough the first because the milking dairy cow comes through the parlor 3 times a day, right? So you've
Regimented.
got regimented. You could do something with each individual cow 3 different times. That could be measure something, that could be download data, that could be plus you've got a milk record. You've got lots of things that you could look at, and those algorithms are just coming out now and are proving to be more and more useful all the time at detecting cows that aren't right, cows that are sick or need attention, need further diagnostics, rather than waiting for a herdsman to see that this cow is sick and needs treatment.
And the last thing we want is for a pen checker or a feedlot operator to make assumptions or health decisions for that pen based on inaccurate or misleading data relative to your snowstorm example, right? We don't want
Yeah,
to go
yeah,
down a decision path where it's like, oh man, we did all that and we took that cost or unnecessary costs, and we really didn't need to because we were kind of misled. That's what we're really trying to avoid here.
yeah. That's correct. That's correct. Um, and also uh, people lose confidence in the system if
Totally.
it's blatantly wrong a large percentage of the time, right? So that's the challenge with these tools. But like I said, I feel I feel really confident with all the technological advances that are happening that I think there's a number of groups that are starting to get close.
Yeah, and there's the animal health component of some of these technologies and the decision making tree, but there's also a labor factors into this as well. From a it requires a different kind of person maybe working in the yard with a different skill set, but also we all know that show me a field that says I don't have a labor supply issue, right? Like
Yeah.
that could be a real assistance in that area as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, Sean. And then there's going to be the whole change management process too. Like we go from how we've always done things in feedlots and had pen checkers and pen riders that are our primary disease detection system. If we have some of these other tools that can augment our animal health workers, or maybe in some cases and scenarios actually sort of replace the detection side, now we got to figure out how do we incorporate that and make sure that it happens within the environment so that we can actually then go identify those animals in the pen, which is also not easy, and get them out so that we can do further assessment and diagnostic shoot side to determine exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, it is a bit of a different skill set. I think the good news is I think there's lots of interested workers that I think are open to the idea of new technology and stuff because I mean they see it every day on their cell phones, new technology, new this, new that, trying to figure out how we can incorporate that into their workflows to make their jobs more fulfilling and to get better outcomes for the cattle that we're looking after. I think if we focus on that, we'll kind of get through that. But to your point, I haven't seen a feedlot yet that's not looking for employees.
Yeah, and there's the hey, we missed that one in the
Yep.
diagnosis process of checking, but there's also the over diagnosis
Mm-hmm.
as well, which is also another issue on the cost overrun side, and not running that animal to some sort of treat facility and not it changes its daily consumption of food. There's a cost factor there, so there's a lot of things happening inside of this. Talk a little bit about what you have seen when it comes to incorporation of technology at the feed yard. Is there differences, smaller yard versus larger yard? Is technology helping one more than the other at this point? Like, what are you seeing or is it basically the same?
Good question. I think in general, larger yards probably adopted some of the technology first because just because for economies of scale they needed to do that, and or just to keep track of things. And I'm using the word technology very broadly, like
Yeah,
even just computerized data collection systems, recording feed to individual pens and all of that stuff. A lot of that they did because they had different customers that owned cattle, and they needed to keep track of things so they could get the right invoices out to the right individuals for the right amount of feed, the right amount of medications, and all those kinds of things. So I think in a lot of family owned or farmer feeder operations, they were probably a little bit slower to adopt technology from that perspective because they owned all the animals. It was their own labor. They weren't trying to bill somebody else, et cetera. So they maybe didn't adopt some of those technologies as soon, partially because they were built for big feedlots and actually maybe didn't work real well, the commercially available ones that were there. And it just wasn't as easy to do because the computer programs and stuff were lazy. That's all changed, and probably within the last 5 to 8 years, there's been several pretty easy to use systems for those operations. So they've adopted that part of the technology. This next part, I don't think it will necessarily split between large and small. I think it will split between operations that are interested in adopting that technology and those that aren't. And part of that might be a philosophy and a mindset. Part of
attitude. Yeah.
that might be attitude, because it probably starts from the top down. Part of that might be I gotta be careful I don't put myself in this guy, but the age demographic of those that are in charge of doing it, I think generally speaking, if they're the next generation, I think they're open to technology and adopting it. And some of us that are more my generation might be a little less likely to do that just because, boy, we're going to leave that for somebody else. So I think there's going to be a couple different things that are going to drive that, but I don't think, I mean, if I look at our customer base, we've got customers that are really small and we got customers that are extremely large, and they all adopt that technology and make really good use of it, cost effective use of it in their operations, the stuff using today. And it's more driven by the philosophy of the operation than the size.
Same pattern when it comes to vets.
I think so. I
Yeah.
think so. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're going to have some that are really progressive thinkers. Of course, you get too far out in front, you probably might make some errors in judgment that you wouldn't have if you'd have been closer to the pack. But I think it's the same thing. I think the progressive thinkers and those that are willing to adopt and try new things. Some of those will be individual veterinarians. Some of those will be veterinarians working in larger groups. Some of them will be old. Some of them will be young. I suspect that more of them will be young than old.
Yeah. So funny how human nature just kind of
Yeah,
rolls into
we
this,
become
right?
set in our ways. It becomes tougher for us to change.
Even when we're younger and we say, I'm never going to be that person, we turn into that
Yeah.
person. It's just funny how that works. So,
Yes, exactly.
from an animal health standpoint, you know, you mentioned BSE and 2003. That will always be a marker for a lot of Canadian producers. I think there's a really good book to be written about the long-term impacts of
Hmm.
2003 on the Canadian beef sector. I'll leave that for somebody to do. Right now we have screwworm as an example that's got that Canada, or sorry, U.S. Mexico border still closed. That's a million feeder cattle that have not entered the United States.
Correct.
Um, are there other things, or maybe those you could talk about that keep you up at night as somebody that's really focused on animal health?
Um, well, I mean, the two things that probably keep most of us up at night. One of which is if foot and mouth disease ever made it to North America again. It's like, how would we, done lots of simulation exercises and preparedness things, and all the way from policy things to actual interventions. But the nature of the disease and its ability to spread quickly, and the fact that it probably would have spread in our systems before we get it detected. I mean, that's the big one that we're probably all concerned about. And the earlier we can detect it, the better. So that's one. And then the whole thing of, even in the feedlot side, just our common diseases that we treat. And we talked about respiratory disease. It's actually a whole bunch of different diseases lumped into one, or a whole bunch of different pathogens that contribute or can cause it. Just trying to figure out how do we manage those two. Those are the two biggest ones. There'll always be some other things, like you said, the New World screwworm threat and some others, but the foot and mouth disease is the big one that sort of hangs over us, I think.
And how does technology and our increased development in that area and the adoption of it, how does that assist us in
Uh,
dealing with some of those challenges?
Yeah, well, I think our ability to be able to monitor things at distance and quickly is far greater than it ever was. And to give you a couple examples, I think, as you know, we work in a few other countries globally, including in Kazakhstan as an example. And even in the feedlot there, we've been able to diagnose probable foot and mouth disease just because we have them do autopsies on everything and send us digital pictures. And we've actually been the ones that have actually, even though we're located in Canada, make the diagnosis and get that fed through so that then their teams can report that to their governments. That would have never happened without technology, and simple technology. It's like camera technology that everybody has on their cell phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got some systematic stuff we put around that. So I think those are examples where, if a rancher who's not located really close to any veterinary clinic has an animal that dies, well, now actually using technology, we can, use telemedicine or some version of telemedicine to try and understand what's going on there, not have to have the farmer make the decision, the rancher make the decision that, holy cow, I'm going to pay the veterinarian to drive 2 hours one way just to get to my place, to open up an animal that's already dead, to maybe learn something that's useful. Yeah, boy, I don't think I'll do that. But if it's just like, okay, can I do something and take some pictures, and my regular veterinarian that I already have a veterinary client patient relationship with can help me through this, I think we're way better positioned for that whole surveillance and monitoring side of things.
Now you mentioned Dr. Kijim earlier,
Yep.
somebody you've worked with for a long time. I cherish any discussion I get to have with Key. You always learn. That's one guarantee. You're always learning multiple things when you talk to Key, just even on a casual basis. Beef on dairy. I've seen him give his presentation multiple times.
Yep.
Fascinating stuff. I know it's something that uh, you are very much a part of. We've seen this massive shift in the adoption of beef on dairy. How is that impacting animal health or carcass consistency when it comes to, because we have all this data coming back now, right? And so we're able to evaluate that outcome a lot easier than we did, say, if this was happening 25 years ago. So what are you seeing?
Yeah. Just how that whole space has exploded has been really interesting to watch. I think couple of things that come immediately to mind. We were we were fortunate. We were involved in the calf fed Holstein side of things. Customers that fed the calf fed Holsteins prior to the sort of changes in the industry that came about when Tyson and Walmart decided that, hey, we want a different carcass spec animal that we're putting through the systems, and so we're probably not going to support the calf fed Holstein market like we did, and so hence one of the drivers related to the expansion of the beef on dairy side. I think managing those calves all the way through from the day they're born through a calf grower operation and then into the feedlot, I think that's given us some great insights into what things that happen early actually affect then what happens in the feedlot, and what are the types of things that we can do at those calf grower operations that set the calf up for better health and better growth and all of those things transition when they get to the feedlot. So that's one of the things we've seen. And because those are in supply chains, uh, you actually can track that because it's not necessarily this fragmented market that
Right.
okay, the calf grower buys it from the dairy and you don't know anything that happened at the dairy, and then the calf grower sells it to a feedlot and again you don't know anything that happened in there because they're in supply chains, some cases even value chains. Then there's that information that can go back and forth and allow there to be continuous improvement in the whole system, from a feedback point of view, but it also, you could create the incentive at the calf grower portion of the production to actually improve it in the feedlot because a lot of times it's the same person, same entities that own them. So they've got a vested interest because they get to share what happens downstream. The second part then is in the carcass characteristic side of the carcass grading side. We're producing in the U.S. more prime carcasses than we ever have, and you see the jumps that are happening. A big chunk of that is coming from the beef on dairy production systems because as they've identified sires that have a much greater ability for marbling, well, you don't just use that bull on 20 cows or 25 cows. You can breed that bull to 1,000 cows or 10,000 cows, and you can get that many offspring that carry that. So it's really allowing um, much faster genetic change to be incorporated into the system because you get that information feedback, and now you can change what you do, and you don't have to produce one bull for every 25 cows to get them bred. That's the other part. Is it's quick, and it's not only on the carcass grading side. Um, it's on the calf survivability side of things. As we were going through the system, we had our customer meeting in the U.S. Last year in Denver. We had a panel discussion with some of our customers, and the question for the panel was, what's the value of data as you're making decisions? And one of the producers said, well, he goes, as we were going through the beef on dairy stuff, and we had sire specific stuff, and so now we're tracking which sires are producing whatever. We were getting to the stage where we were starting to get a bunch of carcass data back. And we noticed that this one sire, which we'd used a lot, we weren't getting much carcass data on it. He goes, well, turns out a large portion of those calves died at the calf grower operation, and then a large portion of them died at the feedlot operation. And so while the carcasses were good when we finally got carcass data, we had a lot less animals from that sire because the survivability wasn't as good through the production system. So simple example,
Yeah.
massive impact.
And it's whether it's feed performance or it's carcass quality or whatever those outputs that we're analyzing, what I'm hearing from you is we're lowering the standard deviation of those outcomes. We're
Yep.
finding more consistency and predictability, which then ties into the financial decisions in terms of what's happening in the yard, removing that variability too, because we're a little bit more little bit more. We always talk about how agriculture is like manufacturing, but it's not like an auto plant. But we're lowering that range, which really allows us to make better decisions.
Agree 100%. And we're lowering that variation, but we still work in a biologic system, so there's
Yeah,
still variation there, which is different than in the factory setting
yeah,
where it's not biology for the most part. And so that's I think that's really cool. What it does do then, it allows us to make progress faster. And I actually think that's one of the exciting things. Well, one for the whole beef on dairy side of things, but I think some of the things we learn as we work our way through that will actually translate to our more conventional cow-calf herds, because I think we'll be able to make genetic progress faster there as well from things that we learn within the beef on dairy side. Just because
that's
the
interesting.
the the yeah, I think there'll be, I don't know what those will be, Sean, but I just think there'll be some really game changer things that we learn that we'll be able to translate or translocate into our more conventional cow calf operations and just make that leap in progress quicker.
We haven't even mentioned artificial intelligence here. I think it was just sort of a natural, sort of like you assume this is part of the data analysis side of this. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. And I think when we think about artificial intelligence, there's several different aspects of it. There's the automation part of it, where we can use AI to help with automation. And lots of times we think about a task, and somebody says, "Well, you can't automate it because of this." But in reality, you need to break a task or a job down into all its little subcomponents. And there's parts of it are still going to require human intervention and human oversight, but there's parts of it that can be automated. And figuring out how to automate the parts that can be automated and keeping the human oversight or intervention on the parts that need that, that's the real sort of key to doing that. And AI helps us with that. So that's one aspect.
Yeah.
Two, analyzing the data and looking for insights in large amounts of data. Yes, but AI makes mistakes. And so you still need domain expertise and human oversight and insight to kind of look at those things and understand, do they make sense? What are the these assumptions make sense, et cetera. And I think you get teams like the group that I get to work with in TELUS Agriculture. We got all these scientists that are extremely capable in their fields, and then when they look at some of the stuff that AI analyzes, they're like, "Well, here's a mistake over here," and you're like, "Yeah, that's why you're here as the domain expert. Look at this. What AI allows us to do is to analyze tons and tons of data at once, but it still takes someone with domain expertise and oversight to help interpret those things. Now, relative to some things that are more um, structured, like computer software coding, AI can do that because that's not biology, that's structured coding in terms of what that is. And so that really helps speed up some things or helps debug some things, et cetera. So there's some things there. And then the other part of it is the whole generative AI side of things, where you no longer have to be a computer programmer to talk to your computer. Yeah, you can type in words in the context thing and ask questions, and probability and huge computing power allows it to do that. And you can even do it with voice. You don't have to type. You don't even have to be able to type. That's some of the power of AI because it allows us to access the data without having to have complex programming skills to be able to ask those questions, get answers, which still require people to sort of vet, if you will, and figure out if those answers really make sense.
Let's leap into the future. I don't know, 2035, 10 years out.
Mm-hmm.
From a technology standpoint, what does your regular feed yard look like? What are we
Mm-hmm.
doing from a technological standpoint?
Well, there'll be a couple things. I'm pretty sure we'll have autonomous driving feed trucks. I don't, I
Makes
don't
sense.
think we'll. I don't think we'll have people driving feed trucks very much unless the system's down. So I think we'll have autonomous feed trucks just for lots of different reasons. So that'll be one. I think that we will have monitoring systems of some sort on every individual animal. I don't know what that's going to look like, Shaun. I don't know if that's a wearable or some. There will be a wearable component to it. I don't know where it'll be wearing it, but that will do that. That will help us monitor the health and welfare of those individual animals and maybe some of the growth characteristics as well. Um, and the other thing I think we'll have is we will have better, I'll call it shoot side diagnostics and precision interventions when we do have sick animals. When we today we get that animal and we put it in a handling facility to examine it closer. We take its temperature, and that's the single most predictive thing we have, and it's good, but it's not. It has its major limitations as well. I think we'll have some shoot side diagnostics that we can use to better pinpoint one, what if the animal's sick and what it has, and two, okay, predict what's going to be the best um, course of therapy for that animal, which may be giving it an antibiotic or a pharmaceutical. It may be tender loving care. It might be something else, right? Um, I think we'll have. I think we'll have better and better tools to sort of do that in a more precise way. No different than we will in human medicine as well.
Yeah, it's like that individualized. We're looking at the herd as a whole, but
Mm-hmm.
we're actually moving closer to more individualized treatment
Yep.
based on what that single animal is experiencing. That
Correct.
that's actually probably there's probably a term for all of this, but it's kind of it's really fascinating to see how it is developing because we actually have the technology to monitor and make decisions from.
Yep. The concept, I think everybody buys into the concept. The real challenge is actually working through which interventions actually have the desired outcomes. And that requires time and testing and data to figure that out. It's not as easy as, okay, well, with this animal, we'll do this, and that animal with this characteristics will do this. And that. You can do all that, but if it doesn't change the outcome, then we actually haven't done anything.
At 100,000 feet, it sounds
Yeah,
super easy.
correct.
On the ground floor of that pen, much more difficult.
Absolutely. Yep, you hit the nail on the head, Sean.
Yeah. Calvin, really appreciate you joining us here today. This has been an awesome look into what's happening, not only at TELUS Agriculture and Consumer Goods, from some of your experiences and what you're doing there, but also just the industry as a whole. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Bushels and Bytes podcast.
My pleasure, Sean. Thanks for having me. Enjoy the rest of your day.